Hello everybody, welcome to today's lecture. Today we will cover chapter number 6 of the book, and it's about the supply, demand, and government policies. In chapter 4, we have extensively discussed the topic of supply and demand, what does each of them means and how they operate. And in the last chapter, we talk about the elasticity. That was basically how much a change will occur in either supply or demand based on the changes in price. So in this chapter, we are mostly talking about government policies and how government policies affect markets. And to know or to measure how these policies affect markets, we basically use the tools of supply and demand, and then we analyze, okay, when government take or implement this policy, that will either affect supply or demand, and then we will see who are the winners, who are the losers, and what are the main effect of government policies. As usual, I will give a quick introduction of the topic, and then there are two main topics which we will discuss further in detail. The first topic is about the control on prices. So this is a government policy. When government, for example, want to control the price of certain product or goods or service, for example, it could be the wages, it could be the rent of a house, and other examples could be used as an example for control of prices. So that's our first topic. And the second topic is about government taxes. So when a government implement a tax on certain product or on a wages or on rent or whatsoever, we will see with the help of demand and supply, we will see how basically government policies influence the market. So we have two topics of discussion. First one, control on prices, and the second one is about taxes. Now I will talk briefly and introduce the topic. So as we have discussed in the first chapter, that economists have two jobs. So economists are first, they're scientists, so the same as any other scientific field. They conduct research, they develop theories, and they try to explain the world around them. So what they do is they develop theories, they collect data, they do research, and then they try to make sense how, for example, certain phenomena is working. Or to put it in a simple word, they want to explain how the world is functioning. So it is just they will tell you, okay, this is demand, this is supply, and that's how it works. So they will just explain it to you. The second, and I think most important role of an economist is as a policy advisor. So economists, they could be of high value if they work as a policy advisor and, for example, give advice to the government, not only how things are happening or why things are happening in that certain way, but also how that things or how that market or whatever, how it could be made better. So as a policy advisor, economists use theory to change the world for better. For example, uh, take the example of minimum wages. So economists, they can explain, okay, how it works, how it affects demand, and how it affects supply of labor, and what does that mean for the economy. So these are all explanations and theories which will explain minimum wage, for example. But as a policy advisor, an economist can give advice to the government. For example, how much should be the minimum wage? So they try to give advice in a such a way, for example, that they probably consider the economic situation, the supply of labor, and the number of unemployment, and then they give advice to the government how to improve the current situation through the policies of minimum wage, for example. So economists, they are not just only explaining things, but they basically can take actions and they can propose policies to the government which will be better for the world as a whole or for that specific country uh, in consideration. So these are the two basic rules of economist as a scientist to explain, and then as a policy advisor to make things or to make the world better. Okay, I will briefly talk about supply and demand. So far we have learned that supply and demand, they are basically the two tools which determine the price and quantity of a product. For example, if you go to a supermarket, you see milk and shelves. So, and you also see the price. So basically, who's who determines how much should be the price of this milk? It's basically through the forces of supply and demand. And then who determines how much milk should be produced? For example, in Germany, again, it's based on the rule of supply and demand. And price works as a signal both to producer and consumer to um, to make the economy work in a such a way that the supply is met by the demand of the people. So those who want milk, they can have milk from the supermarket, and those who wish to produce, they will produce. So basically, the supply and demand, they work in a way that it determines the price in a market and also the quantity of a product in a market. So these are the really fundamentals of how an economy works. We have also learned that certain policies will shift either demand or supply. So the supply and demand curve, sometimes they also shift either to the right side or to the left side. So we have discussed this in detail in the previous chapter. So whenever a supply or demand curve shifts, that also changes the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So these topics should be familiar to you because we have discussed that in previous chapters. So any change in supply and demand will also affect the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity of that product in the market. And in the last chapter, we talked about elasticity. So this term elasticity actually will tell us how much either supply or demand will change as a result of price. So this elasticity gives us a quantitative measure of changes in supply and demand. Okay, so with these three topics that I've just talked, we are in a position to evaluate and understand the effect of government policies. So if there is a change in government policy, you will be able to systematically analyze it and see whether supply changes or demand changes and how that affects the market equilibrium. Is it good or is it not good? And with the help of elasticity at the last, we will see who, specifically in the case of taxes, we will see who actually uh, pays the taxes or who shoulders the burden of taxes in reality. Okay, as an example of government policies, it could be policies to control price. We will have a hypothetical example that we have been following from the previous chapter, that is the market for ice cream. So government could either, so one will be the equilibrium market price and market quantity for ice cream, which will prevail without government intervention. And that's based on the supply and demand. For example, in a city, the normal price of an ice cream would be $3 or €3. And then we will see what happens if government changes this price or set a regulation that okay, from now on the price of ice cream should either be €2 or $2, or it should be above the equilibrium price that should be like around €4 or $4. So these are the example of um, policies to control prices. A similar example could be given in case of rent controls. For example, in some countries, the government says, okay, the rent of a house or a room or an apartment should not be much more than this or should not be less than this. So that's basically also a government policy to control the price for renting a house. Other example includes minimum wage. In German, it's called Mindestlohn that we have talked during our first session. So that's also a government policy to control prices. And in the second topic, we will talk about the taxes. So when government impose a tax on certain good or service, we will see with the help of demand and supply how these taxes, who actually pays these taxes in reality, or who on whom falls the burden of the tax or the incidence of the tax. And yeah, so these are the few examples as an introduction to the topic. And now I will move to our first topic, which is about the control on prices. So in this topic, there are two terms that we will be using a lot, so it makes sense to define it first. The first term is called price ceiling. So I will read the official definition from the book. It says, a legal maximum on the price at which a good can be sold. So government sets a boundary on the top price. It says like, okay, nobody could charge more than this price. So it's a ceiling, it's on the top. So no more price or prices allowed above this. For example, government says, okay, ice cream should not be sold more than €4 per con. So that means that that is a price ceiling. So with the price ceiling, government restricts the maximum price that the sellers can charge. The second term is called price floor. It's basically the other way around. So it's the minimum price that producers or sellers can charge on a per unit of ice cream, for example. So the formal definition is a legal minimum wage, a legal minimum on the price at which a good can be sold. So it's the minimum price that you can sell a good on that with that price. For example, government says, okay, the minimum price for ice cream should be no more than €2. So that's the price floor, and it's like the minimum one. So you can charge as much higher prices you wish, but not below than €2. Okay, so uh, we move to our first topic, and that's about how price ceilings affect market outcome. So we now understand the meaning of these two terms, and then we say, okay, if the government sets a price ceiling, how that affects the demand and supply, or how that changes the market as a whole. So when the government set a price ceiling, when the government says, okay, the price of ice cream should not be more than 3 euros, then it has two outcomes. Um, so the first outcome would be that the new price, for example, when the government sets a new price, the new price is above the equilibrium price. So in that case, for example, the equilibrium price of an ice cream is now 3 euros, and then the government says, okay, the price of ice cream should not be more than 4 euros. So if you see the price of ice cream is already not more than 4 euros, which is 3 euros. So this one is, it's not a binding price ceiling. What does that mean is like nothing is changing in the market because the price is already below this price ceiling. And as you can see in figure 1 in the book, it's part A. So a price ceiling that is not binding. So you see government sets the price at 4, but basically in the market now the price is already 3 euros. So this price ceiling really doesn't make any change in the market. Why? Because consumers and producers, they are already paying 3 euros, and that's well below the price that the government has set. So it doesn't change anything in the market. In the second case, what happens is that the new price actually is the below the equilibrium price of ice cream in the market. You can see this in figure 1 and in graph 2, in graph B, it says a price ceiling that is binding. So now what happens is that government sets a price which is below the market equilibrium. In this example, the government says, okay, the maximum price that the ice cream should be sold by producers is 2 euros. Nobody should charge 3 euro for an ice cream. But normally, without government intervention, everybody was trading or buying and selling the ice cream at the price of 3. So when the equilibrium price is above the price ceiling, that's actually a binding or abiding constraint on the market. So this new price ceiling. So what happens in this case, as you can also see in the graph, that when the price ceiling is below the equilibrium price, then there will be a shortage of, for example, ice cream in the market. Why? Because 2 euro is very little, for example, for producers. They say, okay, if we have to sell it on 2 euros, then some of them, they will close their ice cream shops, and they say it's too expensive for us to produce ice cream. If we sell it for 2 euros, we don't make any profit, or even we encounter losses. So that's why they don't produce. So what happens is that there is a shortage of the ice cream in the market. There is a high demand because the price is now 2 euros, but not that much producer are producing. So that's why the supply is decreased and there is a shortage in the market. And basically, to put it in a simple terms, that is not good for the market. Why? Because producers want to produce at price 3, and consumers before, they were also happy to pay 3 euros. But now, because of this new regulation by government, they are not engaging in this trade. So suppliers are not supplying, and then consumers are not consuming enough because there is a shortage. So in general terms, that's not a good outcome for the market. So what happens when there is a shortage of certain products? So what happens is that probably there will be a long queues to get an ice cream because only few suppliers are providing ice cream and so on, and only probably some sellers will only give to their loyal customers or to their friends and families, but not to everyone. So they will ration um, these limited amount of ice cream that they have. So just to put it in a summary, how price ceilings affect market outcome. So it has two outcome. First, if the price is above the market equilibrium, the ceiling price, then it doesn't change anything in the market. But if it's the below equilibrium price, then it will create a shortage in the market. So that was the first topic. And the second topic, it's about how price floor affect market outcome. So now we consider a policy in which the government sets the minimum price for a market, and then we see how that affects the market in terms of supply and demand. Okay, again, when government sets the price floor, there are two outcomes in a market. So, and at first, or in the first case, equilibrium price is above the floor, floor price. So government says, okay, nobody should sell lower than this price. So, for example, government says nobody should sell ice cream lower than 2 euros. But if the price is already 3 euros, which means above 3 euro, nothing is going to change. So this government price floor is not binding. And that's why it will not have any effect in the market. And you can see this in figure 4 and graph A, which shows a price floor that is not binding. So you see the market equilibrium for ice cream was 100 ice cream at the price of 3 euros, and government says, okay, nobody should sell ice cream below the 2 euros. And you see, because the price is already 3 euros, so nothing is changing, and this price floor is not binding. But in chart B, you can see that the price floor is above the market equilibrium price. So government set the price floor of ice cream at 4, but the market equilibrium is at 3. So before, what it means is that government says, okay, the minimum price for ice cream should be 4 euros. So now they are charging 1 extra more euro as compared to the normal equilibrium. So what happens is that is actually a binding constraint on the market. So it affects the market. What are the consequences of this? First, what happens is that the suppliers, because the price is high, they are producing a lot, but consumers, they are not buying it. Why? Because the prices has increased, so their demand will decrease. So what happens is that there will be a surplus of ice cream, in this case, in the market, so there will be more producers of ice cream. Why? Because the price has increased from 3 to 4, but on the other hand, not many people are buying ice cream because the price has raised. Okay, so that was the two topics that we have talked about and how they affect the market. Okay, the next topic is about evaluating price control. So we will see what happens when a price is being controlled. So as we said previously, that market is a good way of managing the economy, um, or it's good way to organize economic activity. So what does that mean is that it is good when there is no government regulation on the prices and other stuff. Why? Because as we said in the beginning, price already gives signals to the consumer and producers what to produce and what to consume. So when government sets such policies, it, um, uh, it plays a wedge or a distortion to the market system, and that's why it affects some people in a negative way. So as I said, prices are actually as a result of the decision of millions of people, both producers and consumers. So that's how this equilibrium price has been reached. And it coordinates economic activities in a way that price tells consumer what to buy and also tells the producer what to produce. So any policy change or any intervention in this mechanism will actually hinder, or which actually will make a problem in the market, or it will impose a wedge in the market. And in the book it says sometimes such policies will actually hurt those that the policy was actually first intending to help. For example, in the case of minimum wage, government decides to increase the minimum wage in order to help the poor people, but because it affects the demand for the labor from the producer point of view, and yeah, when the price of labor increases, so companies will hire less workers, and that will actually result in unemployment. So the initial purpose of government was to support the working class or the poor, so they have a basic minimum income. So that's why government has implemented minimum wage law, or it has increased the minimum wage law. But because the consequences of this policy is that it creates unemployment, so again it hurts the working class, because some of them will benefit because they have higher wages now, but some of them they will lose their job. Why? Because when the price of labor for producer increases, they will hire less labor, so they will decrease their demand for labor, and that will result in unemployment. And the author of this book argues that there are other ways or other policies that we can help those people whom we want to help through other ways or through other policies, not by changing or controlling the price. And as an example, they said instead of, for example, minimum wage, we can do some other policies such as wage subsidy, that we give a subsidy to those who are working. And there is one policy also in the United States which is called earned income credit tax, something like that, which basically helps the working class. So as long as you're working, government is supporting you, and this policy is quite famous. Uh, yeah, it's called earned income tax credit in the United States. Okay, that ends our first part, and we will take a short break and continue with the taxes in the next video.